Okay, we've reached 2 minutes past, so I'm going to kick it off. Again, as always, few of you've used the Q&A, so excited to have some more chatter in there. Yeah, welcome some fellow familiar CT folks. So by way of introduction, before we kick off the actual topic, my name is Catherine. I head up solutions engineering and alliances at Automox and have been here over 3.5 years now. So feels like about 15 years in a good way, in the sense that I've been very lucky to speak to thousands of customers now across different industries, different customer sizes. And so my hope for this call, when we're talking about kind of safe automation and how to implement safe automation, it's a really exciting topic that I think resonates with almost everyone we talk to. And so it's really taking those experiences, what we've learned at Automox over the past few years, and hopefully translating that to you all in a way that's meaningful. But most importantly, there's actual items that you can take away and start to discuss or implement with your own teams. So, like I said, that was a little bit of myself. As far as today goes too, please use the Q&A. I'll have some resources at the end of this that get sent out as well. Feel free to reach out directly if you have any questions. Like I said, definitely excited to chat with you all. And the high level agenda that we've curated is, when we look at safe automation and automation in general, just like to talk about the why for a little bit. If anything, it's just a sanity check for everyone on the call, right? Really, what are the challenges that everyone is experiencing, and why has automation been such a hot topic the past few years? Where are the advantages of that, right? Actually quantifying that for you all too. And you'll see how that hopefully helps with the later topic of considerations and really that path to achievable and safe automation, right? And why is it that we harp on the safety? What are the concerns, right? Why isn't everybody implementing automation if there's such advantages? And then if you've spoken to me before, if you're familiar with solutions engineers, I like to put my money where my mouth is. And so really just showing everybody a demo of this console itself, right? And of the automation in action itself, I think will hopefully tie everything together really, really well. And we should have you wrapped up well before the hour ends, answer any questions, like I said, that we get, and so on and so forth. So that being said, when we look at the problems, right, not to complain, but it is important. And I think it is something that everybody resonates with. I kind of bucket it into 4 pillars, right? There's a tool problem, a volume problem, a time problem, and a resource problem. We'll kind of go into all of them and why they make automation a need to have and not just a nice to have, like it might have been a few years ago. And so when you look at the tool problem specific to IT admins, specific to the folks that are fixing, that are remediating, that are doing something on the endpoint, right? That endpoint hardening team. It's very, very legacy tools that these teams have to work with to take action on their endpoint, right? You look at security tools, they're cloud native, they're, what are all the buzzwords? Zero trust, autonomous, right? There's some AI components. You look at those IT doing tools, they are very, very legacy, right? On-prem dependent or VPN dependent, some sort of hardware or infrastructure that adds in a ton of complexity, even if it's just a cloud gateway or a VM, right? That's added layer of complexity, added layer of inconsistency. It's not flexible. But the biggest piece, especially related to today's topic, is that last pillar, which is the minimal automation, right? They are very tedious. They are very tedious, very manual. And why that is becoming such a hindrance more than ever is if we look at this volume problem just on the published CVEs, right? Just on the published CVEs, that's quadrupled in the past 4 years. So the problem and the risk that teams are up against, just the obvious risk, right, has more than quadrupled in the past decade. And, I always like to ask when we talk about this stat specifically, hey, has anybody's team quadrupled in the past 4 years? We know the hours in the day haven't quadrupled, right? The question or the answer is almost always no, right? We have not had our teams quadruple in size and in resource in the past 4 years or 10 years, as nice as that would be. And then if you look at this little stat at the bottom as well, right, 35%, so tied for number 2, next to 2FA being missing, were patches being exploited, right? Missing patches being exploited. So you're seeing, right, a problem that is catching up, us not being able to keep up with the volume of exploits and of patches and critically exploited vulnerabilities. It is catching up with teams, and it's insane to see it go from a much smaller problem to tied for number 2 next to 2FA being missing in the environment. You've also got, because of that, this pretty massive time problem that's starting to accumulate as well, where for us as organizations, we're seeing an average of over 100 days to remediate critical vulnerabilities, right? And that seems pretty insane, but when you think about, again, the complexity in environments, remote workstations, servers versus virtual versus, where everyone is located versus, the third-party applications we have, the operating systems themselves, it does start to make a little bit more sense. You also look at the volume and you look at the tools these teams have to work with. Why is it taking us so long? And on the flip side of that, that delta is increasing because it's taking attackers less and less time to actually weaponize and exploit these vulnerabilities. And something very interesting about 2023 that just came out in the Rapid7 vulnerability report was that was the first year that 0 days were exploited more than patch plus N. So 60% of exploits were 0 days. So that means before a patch is even available, and I think the 7 days has shrunk pretty considerably because of that, right? How long it's taking attackers to weaponize these. And so, like I said, not creating or not showing these statistics to try to fearmonger, but again, it's more of a sanity check for all these teams that are the ones in the field having to deal with these problems, right? The volume, the time, the pressure, the tools that they have. And so our charter is to get as many companies as possible to be able to harden that critical infrastructure within 24 hours. Right. And obviously, as you can probably guess from today's topic, automation is a massive part of that for us. And so kind of, finally related to everybody as well here is just the resource problem. And these are some statistics that we gathered, right, in our reports. And so I don't need to necessarily read all of them at you, but, the mantra here being there is massive unhappiness and discontent with folks in our industry, right? Arguably so when you look at all those problems. There's a big talent shortage, churn is massive, right? Gaps between teams are massive, stress levels are massive, productivity is decreased, all while these cyber criminals are just getting quicker, more sophisticated, they're communicating, they're working together well, right? And they're just exploiting those gaps and that inequity that we're seeing more and more. And so that's kind of where automation is becoming a huge pain reliever for companies, right? Especially in security and IT. And so, right, number one thing is immediate improvement in security posture for these companies implementing automation in any of multiple ways. And we'll talk about a few, obviously, on this webinar. But a big part is that stress, right? Less stress in day-to-day operations. And when you start to think about those mundane tasks that are really, really painful, really episodic, knowing that we have an alternate route that allow us to make it to, we were just talking about, right, like kids' games in the afternoon. We're not working weekends. Our vacation isn't disrupted the second something is potentially vulnerable in the environment, but we have automated safeguards to be able to help orchestrate for us, right? Meeting goals and SLAs, and that also ties back into job satisfaction. Hey, I'm meeting goals, I'm making a difference, I'm not continuously struggling to catch up, or I'm not continuously treading water, which is exhausting, right, for companies and for the people mostly. And then, in general, automation allows people to be a lot more agile, the companies to be agile, the companies to be able to respond quicker, right? But also to be able to use their time, their human resources on more valuable projects and tasks where automation is kind of taking the lower hanging fruit. So, we've talked about this really gruesome problem or multiple problems, right, that all roll into treading water, right? Trying to stay afloat, a lot of emotional stress, a lot of concerns. And we've seen how automation can help that pretty much immediately. So why isn't every company doing this, right? Why isn't there a no-brainer to implement automation into our security and IT practices wherever possible? And rightfully so, there are some concerns that we definitely want to call out and make sure that we're addressing anytime we talk about this topic. And right, first and foremost is huge security concern around automation in endpoint management specifically, right? The endpoints are our critical lifeline in any company, right? Our servers, our workstations, they're what helps companies run, right? They're the bones of any company. And so when you start to do something automatically on those devices, and we've seen this, right? We've seen this with the best companies in the world. Uh, the safeguards and the security concerns around that automation having some massive negative, right, connotation or impact in the environment is a massive concern, right? And I actually wouldn't be surprised if after this year this number hasn't gone up as far as who's concerned, right? But also when we look at endpoint management specifically, we're involving a lot of third parties, right? Whether it's patches or ransomware risk there. And so, would it be great to update third parties or hundreds of third parties automatically and create SLAs and an optimization? Yeah, but what are the risks around that? How can we safeguard, right? Any and all access creep with tools that are implementing automation, unsigned automation or PowerShell risks. And in general, I think it's this idea of, well, I don't know, right? It's being automated, so I'm not doing it manually. I don't have that granular visibility, or the misconception is I don't have that visibility that I've had in the past. And that's very scary, right? So what can we do with automation to create more visibility, pre and post automation, and so on and so forth is super important. And that's kind of where, as far as how we're thinking about automation at Automox and the purpose of, today's topic and this safely implementing automation are, what are some concrete takeaways that we've seen time and time again help organizations, right, in the environment? And so one of the things that I wanted to talk about just very briefly before we go into that is Automox itself, so that you have a good idea when we're talking about what we're seeing, right? When we're talking about what it means to be a company that surrounds itself with automation. Endpoint hardening, right, is our goal. And when I talk about endpoint hardening, it really means fixing the endpoint from Automox's standpoint, right? So for some context on the baseline of everything we've discussed today. And then, these pillars that you see on your screen here are just important categorization. If you can't tell, I like my categories, like my swim lanes, my pillars. And the 3 Ps, the people, process, product, have always been really helpful in any type of company situation, right? Team structure, executables, goals, roles and responsibilities. But in general, for implementing safe automation, these 3 pillars are very, very relevant, how they tie into each other and how they're important to rolling out a project as large as company-wide automation. And so from a people standpoint, right, this is definitely the most emotional layer. I think it tends to be the grayest area as well, right? Because people are less predictable, right? People are often not considered an outward pillar in a project necessarily, right? We're the ones executing, but how do you incorporate that consideration into a project and into a safe rollout of automation? I don't know if that gets talked about a ton. And so, getting team buy-in it probably sounds like the most obvious thing ever, but part of what we're really getting at here is the more champions that you have for yourself inside your business unit and the company in general, the easier it is to get any type of implemented project or automations rolled out, right? So that goes into the process owners, that goes into the executive sponsors, and just tapping all that in-house knowledge, whether you have someone from your HR or accounting department that's rolled out automation. Our legal counsel, funny enough, right, has rolled out some really incredible AI and automation tools around, competitive intelligence, around things like, legal documentations and questions. And so tapping that in-house knowledge, you'd be very surprised, or at least I was, right? Kind of the results that those teams have seen, and being able to create my own sponsorship and helping companies create their own sponsorship for, that actual rollout itself. And then this bottom piece is super important. Another thing I don't think we talk about enough, right? Security and IT specifically. I feel like the work that gets done by these teams is very black box, right? Magic behind the curtain. Don't get thanked for every day that something doesn't go wrong, right? And every day that a company is secure and that we're reducing risk, but they're also the team that gets put in the hot seat if something ever does happen. And so the reason we include this brag for support from people on the team is maybe a little bit less so related to automation as a project itself, but for you all on this call, right? I have very rarely seen any implementation in a project, right? Whether it's security toolings, firewalls, other networks tools, microsegmentation, security tools, ticketing systems, reporting, right? Automation and endpoint hardening is one of the areas that gets such quantifiable results as far as time saved, risk reduced, and cost saved, that it's a really, really incredible, just personal opportunity as well, not only to brag for future support, to be able to say that, hey, we've owned this and this is the results that we've gotten from implementing automation into our environment. So like I said, I think an interesting topic to think about, especially when you start to see how that security and finance and business are really blurring at a lot of organizations. A project like this is often a really, really good one to start solidifying yourself as a leader, not just in your company, but in the industry, right? Because again, we've talked about a lot of organizations still on very legacy manual processes for endpoint hardening specifically. Then you look at the actual process piece itself, right? And I think the process is really important to kind of, bridging that gap, I would say, right? Bridging that gap as far as it really is the transition between security and IT, right? The automation itself, and it should be. And so, you look at a lot of the mundane tasks, patching just the easiest one to call out, right? Because patching is a really thankless, redundant, miserable job, for lack of a better word. I mean, if someone loves patching, feel free to shout it out. I have not talked to anyone that I feel like loves patching or is their favorite part of their day. And again, I think it's more so because it is very manual, it is very thankless, and it is something that I think is the perfect job for automation, right? As long as we do put those safeguards in place, because there's many, many good concerns around just going ahead and automating patching, right? So identifying those frequent mundane tasks, whatever that might be for your organization, right? It even might be, hey, even the process from identifying vulnerabilities to, to actually passing them from security to IT. That's super manual for us today. We have to take a spreadsheet of CVEs, sometimes 100, 200,000 lines. Then that Excel gets passed to my IT team, and then they have to sort and figure it out. Right there is a very manual process that maybe it happens weekly, monthly, not even for some organizations. So identifying those processes first and foremost, and then oftentimes very helpful just to organize that into lists of, low impact to high impact. So again, what are the low impact, really mundane, tedious things that we can start now automating for ourselves? I think it's super helpful to pick a standard as well, both external and internal. So external, it could be something like, a CIS standard, or, things like PCI, NIST, whatever the case may be for yourself. But also those internal goals, especially as you start to scale that automation, are super helpful, right? Because you can kind of also, back to that people category, be able to say, hey, today, we weren't able to even meet a 30, 60, 90 SLA. Today we weren't really able to patch criticals in 30 days. Here's where it was with the tools we had in place, with the processes we had in place. We were really straying from those SLAs. But after automation as well, we've been able to reduce those SLAs to something like I showed earlier, the 24 hours, being able to remediate your criticals, right? And setting new SLAs that are attainable but impressive for your organization and show the amount of risk that's been reduced and time that's been saved with the automation that you've implemented. And then again, a little straightforward, but just applying that to the real world scenarios, right, that I have mentioned. So starting with the mundane, low impact, moving into areas where automation can be very impactful, but maybe a slower rollout. And all of this from a process standpoint, I think most important, especially where any type of automation is concerned, get comfortable revisiting and fine tuning, right? If you go into this understanding, hey, I'm not just flipping a switch and turning a blind eye and never revisiting this again, right? That's where kind of the scariness of the unknown comes into place for a lot of us. It's, hey, look, we have automation. We know the goals we're trying to meet. We know the time we're trying to save, the risk we're trying to reduce, the cost that we're trying to save, but it's constantly flowing, right? It can improve or it can change or it can scale as our business does. And so again, setting that expectation for yourself will reduce a lot of stress, but also to the organization, right? It doesn't matter. This is a fluid process, and we can kind of, change as we go. And then comes the actual product itself. And so, as I mentioned, process is sort of the bridge between people, between IT and security specifically. Product is a bridge between all, right? It bridges the people and the process. It helps you execute that process itself. And it's critical to all of this, right? Critical to automation and the projects that we're trying to roll out. So a few things from a product standpoint that I just think are pretty important to call out, right? First and foremost, know that tech stack, right? Know what tools you're using and where to invest or where to divest. And I only say this because this was a topic, right, the past year, and a lot of things that we were hearing discussed from organizations, a lot of shiny tools, right? A lot of exciting products, a lot of exciting opportunities in the environment. But because of that, there's a ton of tools that are overlapping from what we're seeing or that are taking on tasks that aren't as critical as, like I said, getting rid of mundane tasks that need to be automated. And so it's really understanding where those impact generating tools are, where are they missing, right? As well as not getting too wrapped up into things like, the shiny objects, the new AI tools, new ML tools. While there are some really cool things out there, a lot of what we'll talk about the rest of this conversation are the real world impact and implications that automation and endpoint hardening have, right? Those real results, which are super critical to everything, every day to day in the health of your organization. And then, when you're looking at a product itself too, and you talk about automation, going for those tools built for agility, built for scale. So those cloud native SaaS technologies are super important, right? Because implementing automation in a super clunky tool that's built together by, acquisition after acquisition, or there's not a flow, it just adds complexity. It doesn't help remove. And that's one of the biggest things that we're looking at from a product. Looking for products that have that plug and play automation, right? Again, this probably sounds biased coming from a tool that does exactly that, but the plug and play automation is super important just because we've seen a lot of tools that talk about automation results, and then we see 6-month, on ramping times, SLAs. And so making sure that those expectations, if that's okay with the business, is totally fine. But looking for and holding those tools accountable to that ramp time and that implementation time is super important. Right. And part of that too, right, demonstrating those results, not just with the right reporting, but one of the things we talk about a lot is, especially when we're talking about the problem, right? I feel like everybody on this call was able to resonate with the problems that we're talking about, right? Can resonate with the growing number of vulnerabilities, having to keep your head above water constantly, of we finally reduce risk and it goes back up, of the legacy tools, of the team shortage. Everyone resonates with the problems, at least on these types of calls. But when it comes to formally garnering for support from leadership or from finance, that's where it gets a little bit difficult, right? Because that's where that translation has to happen of why is it important for us to invest in something like automation, right? What are we getting in return? And I don't think we hold our tools accountable enough, right? I don't think we hold vendors accountable enough. And it's something that you should feel comfortable and confident doing, right? You're putting your trust in a tool to be able to help you get to certain goals. Make sure they're demonstrating the result, right? Make sure that product is demonstrating the results of that actual risk reduced, right? And seeing it in action, of the time saved, right? If I can't test out a tool in a few days in a POV, I can't expect to get results in a few days when I actually roll this out, right? What does that look like? Really reverse engineer your goals and those conversations you're having with that product and make sure you understand how they're going to get you there. Super important. And like I said, don't shy away from that, because that's really the gold and the meat that helps translate to finance, to your leadership, of why something is so incredibly important, not just because it makes our lives, extremely improved, but because it's improving the business as a whole. And so, how we're doing this and the automation that Automox specifically, as I've kind of alluded to before, from a product perspective, is achieving this is a few different things, right? We talked about architecture when we're looking at automation as our mantra and core of the platform. Being that first cloud native tool to the space was very important, but continuing to architect the platform to be modular, to be scalable, and to be safe and secure for our customers was paramount, right? Especially after you see some of the security concerns from legacy tools, right? It's a very important space to be built security up, to be built cloud native from the ground up, and also to be built scaled for cross-platform, right? At this point, I would say very few companies have a singular OS 100%, but you want to automate at scale. You don't want to leave stragglers, right? You don't want to leave vulnerable endpoints. And then also automating in the sense of working with your other tools, whether it's your security tools, IT, ticketing, reporting, right? Orchestration tools, SOAR tools is critical. And then you look at these pillars of automation here. Patching, we've talked about briefly, right? But it's critical because it is one of the lowest hanging fruit of checks all the boxes with it's mundane, it's painful, it's never going to stop, it's only getting more tedious, and it's only getting more cumbersome. We need a level of automation with how we patch and how we secure our application and our operating systems. But this middle pillar, if there's one takeaway from this conversation, right? Because I think everybody knows the pains and the needs around patching, or at least they're a little familiar with it. But the second we start patching well, people often don't realize that the next thing our mind is going to go to is, well, what about all the unpatchable stuff, right? What about all the projects of removing admin permissions that shouldn't be there, or just even removing an application that shouldn't be there, or registry key edits or 0 days that are not patchable, but they are, as we talked about, now even more exploited quicker than anything else in the environment, and a massive security risk. So automation around the configuration piece is paramount for us as well, and what we think about from the ground up in addition to patching. So how do I not only set SLAs in the environment that tell Automox, hey, if you see something critical, it needs to be patched in 24 hours, and I need to give the end users less flexibility around reboots and deferrals. Third parties need to get patched in 7 days, right? To make sure we're keeping up with, I've gotten a Zoom notification every day this week, I feel like, for patching. Chrome is the same thing. Who are my heavy hitters? Make sure that, they don't go beyond 7 days being unpatched. Everything else can go about 30 days, right? How do I set that baseline of automation for patching, but go beyond it to say, for me and my organization, what it takes for me to be compliant, what it takes for me to be comfortable, is also enforcing a baseline that says, hey, make sure only this group has admin permissions and it's removed from everywhere else. Make sure Flash is uninstalled from everywhere in my environment and kept out of my environment, right? Flash is one of those where like everybody grunts. It gives you like 10,000 vulnerabilities, but it's also just a pain to find and get rid of. Automox, find it, get rid of it, keep it out of the environment, right? Kind of automate that as my baseline. I don't want certain devices to use USBs. I have a 0 day that needs to be remediated, or I want to make sure I'm constantly checking for Log4j or things that resurface. So all of those unpatchable remediations and automations, hopefully the wheels are turning, and some of the projects that you have, you're able to think of, well, how can I have made my life easier, right? And then control in general. So automation, and we've talked about this, hey, there's a lot of concerns around automation, and control is a really key point, whether it's actual point, click, remote into a device and take action, deploy software, right, manage my device in real time, is very important to feel comfortable, right? I know that I can roll back a patch immediately from all devices. I know that I can block a patch from ever being deployed. I know that I can, quarantine a device or whatever is needed real time to support the automation that we're implementing in our environment. And when we talk about that baseline, as I talk about really the results that you can have with automation, this is an interesting topic because I look at the process again that most companies have, and it makes sense, visibility first, right? We need tools such as the tools you see in the top right here that find the problems for us, right? But what we're noticing because of that is a very reactive, okay, well, now I have all these results. I have all these issues. I have these vulnerabilities, these misconfigurations, these missing patches. And now I kind of have to work to fix that, right? Patch Tuesday gets released. We finally work. Another one comes out, right? And it's that constant roller coaster that you're seeing in the environment. And you're struggling to get a risk score consistently lowered, right? And so what we're doing with these companies and really the way that we're approaching this is proactive remediation, right? Set that baseline with Automox that we talked about before, your patching SLAs, your policies, your configuration automations, and watch as that genuinely reduces risk up to 95% off the bat and keeps it there, right? Because that automation is constantly looking at the state of your environment at that baseline you've set. And as it strays, it brings it back, right, to that center. And so integrating with these tools, but also setting that proactive baseline with the Automox policies. This is a genuine screenshot from a customer, right, that had one of these vulnerability scanners. You can see about 1 million risk score on just one device, right? And you can guess where they implemented the Automox policies, and the risk in this case reduced about 93% just in that span of under a week, right, with Automox. In reality, they really just implemented some policies in a day, and you can see this massive drop. So it's definitely not something to shake a stick at. And like when I mentioned, automation is fun because it's one of those projects that is so rare in the sense that it gets such massive quantifiable impact in your environment. Imagine showing this to leadership, to finance, to your team. That is a difference in a project and implementation that they can't argue value, right? The value is there. And I really, really love that. And it's why I'm so passionate anytime we talk about, automation itself. So what I wanted to do as well for today is just a quick, again, words are words. Let's see it in action. The ease of use, the ease of implementing that baseline that I'd mentioned, some of those policies. And then, as well, open it up to some of the questions I know we've had come through, which is awesome. So as far as a demo goes, let me go ahead and share now my demo environment that should be up right here. There we go. And, again, I can't demo necessarily the cloud native piece, but you'll definitely see the ease of use, the scalability, right? We've had customers get Automox in 10,000 plus devices within an hour, just due to integrations and lightness of the tool itself. And then you get kind of this flow of who are my compliant devices, that baseline we talked about, what's the automation and policies that have been executed this past week, right? How are we improving our SLAs ideally from what we see here or what we've seen before, and trying to move from, hey, any criticals being outstanding, highs, mediums, to everything being lower left, right? As much as possible. Device troubleshooting, and really as that device health improved over time, has it stayed there over the last, however many days you decide to report on. Then within there, we have device visibility and software inventory that's super impactful. I'm not going to show this too much because I want to focus on the automation, but just know that you do have device inventory. And most importantly, it's actionable, right? If you need to reboot or remove or scan, same thing with that software inventory. If I'm trying to see if, Flash is in the environment, I don't think I have Flash in my demo environment, but okay. We've got Flash ROM, but if I have Chrome or something like that, right? Any of the software, I want to see Chrome versions. want to be able to take action on it, all of that's available to pull up right here on your screen. And that visibility helps you understand and determine as well, what are the baselines that I want to set? And that's the policies, right? Anytime I've talked about automation, as far as Automox is concerned, that's our policies. And it falls into those three pillars of patching, like we talked about, right? How do I want to configure this? How do I want this to execute? When do I want it to execute? Software deployment, whether that's deploying, just productivity software to security software and keeping that as your baseline. And the worklets is our term for all that configuration automation when it's not patchable, right? How do I still automate that? Our worklets are our way of accomplishing it. And they're just script-based, so PowerShell or Bash at its core, which is really, really nice. Not an invented language. Pretty much every use case is already out there. So if you're like me, you don't have to be a PowerShell guru necessarily, but you can still get a lot of work done. So I'm going to start with the patching itself, just because, again, it's the core, it's the mundane, it's the painful. And the best way to think about the Automox patch policies is you're going to tell it, what do you want to patch? Who do you want to patch? And when do you actually want that to happen? So if I click into a patch policy, that was the what you want to patch. Basically, how wide or how narrow do I want to get with what I'm addressing, with what I'm targeting? So do I want to patch everything, OS and third party together, right? We'd already gotten a question in the chat of what third parties, do we support? Right now, Automox has the largest list of separate third party applications that are natively supported in the environment. Back to the security of the automation there as well, just since we're talking about third parties. Automox is the only vendor today that actually runs all those third-party patches through, we're calling it patch safe, but basically a multi-step process to scan those packages themselves before deploying them to make sure that there's no malware, right? Nothing malicious in them before it gets deployed to your environment. So don't know about you, but that makes me feel a lot better being able to say, yeah, I do want to make sure my third parties are automated and patching at least once a week. So that's the what you want to patch. The who you want to patch are going to be groups native to Automox. If you want to split out, very typical setup is test versus workstations versus servers and so on and so forth. But also device targeting if you want to use any native attributes to the device itself, right? Tags you can create, IP, host name, ADOU, so on and so forth. And then you just have the when. When do I want this automation taking place, right? What is the cadence? What are the SLAs? And so just to follow that example I gave you before, I could say, hey, look, a patch all. So that covers both OS and third party, right? It covers everything. I want to make sure that at least first Monday of every month, right, that anything outstanding is being patched. It's kind of got a 30-day SLA there, right, as far as those devices are concerned. But I can go ahead and like I said, build some quick granularity, build some quick automation to say those third parties we were just talking about, I'm going to go into patch only policy, which now allows me to actually target those packages and get a little bit more granular. And I could say, hey, anything Chrome, Adobe, if I have it. Yep. Let's say Zoom is another one. I want to make sure that these applications, take it a step further, make sure we've got our other browsers in there, right? Firefox. I want to know that these are being patched at least weekly. So if there's any outstanding patches, maybe we'll do it at the end of the week. Every Friday, make sure that those third parties are being updated. And then finally, just to round out, quick 2 minutes, we're also able to put in that last third policy to say, now criticality, since I'm in a patch severity policy, anything critical needs to be hardened in 24 hours, right? If the device is offline during the patch, I want to make sure the next time it checks in, that's enforced. And for every single policy, you also have those custom notifications, right? So again, we talk about, well, how do we make sure we're implementing this automation safely with minimal user disruption? This is critical to that, right? We don't want to be getting emails or calls of, hey, you just kicked someone out of a board meeting or a mission critical Zoom call, or, the device rebooted and I had to get on a super important call. It wasn't supposed to. And so knowing that you can differentiate between, hey, on certain devices, whether it's servers or executive devices, I don't want any automated restart, right? I'll be in control of that, or the end user will be in full control of that. But on other devices or for more common scenarios, I can say, I don't need to notify every time, but before a reboot is necessary, I want to make sure they get a notification and I can control the deferrals, right? So for something like a regular patch policy, I could say, all right, I'll give them 7 deferrals. They can choose how long they want to defer for and then get a final notification. But, maybe if it's critical, like it's one of those critical policies, you only get 1 deferral, right? And that needs to happen within the day. And so knowing that you're still allowing some leeway, there's still flexibility, but you're also in full control of what happens on the end user device is critical. And I know we've only talked about patching for about 5 minutes, but that's how easy it is to start implementing not only a baseline of security and execution, but also doing it safely, right? Knowing that you're not disrupting end users, knowing that you're still in control, you can pause automation is super critical. And then to show you the other side of that, just how easy it would be to implement any of the configuration automation, that's our worklets. And so there's 2 ways to go about this. We can create worklets with what we call Auto AI. And so our plugin to allow plain text to script creation. So, hey, I want you to write me a script that checks if SMBV1 is disabled and then disable it, and taking that plain text to actually creating a PowerShell script that you can test and verify has been super, super impactful. But for the timing purposes, I also wanted to highlight the catalog, because that's where our very human team now of engineers is constantly creating scenarios around system preferences, maintenance tasks, security settings, right? Software preferences, software lifecycle. That's extremely beneficial to having a human team that's constantly understanding what configurations are a concern and doing that work for you, validating, checking, verifying, and maintaining these scripts so that I can just plug and play and know that I'm setting a safe baseline of automation in my environment. And you can see there's over 360 use cases we built today all across those different topics, from all types of security settings, like I mentioned, maintenance tasks, gathering of information, taking of action, that you can really start to implement, pretty infinite automation. But just to talk about some of those examples I'd given you, right? It's a 0 day. We've already talked about how prevalent those are being exploited, more so than patches now. And so knowing that you have this team that does research those 0 days, the fixes, and creates those for you, I'm able to now search for a certain CVE or search for a very, highly anticipated 0 day and run that fix in my environment, right? Log4j being a very good example, just because this was one where even after the patch became available, people couldn't update, right? It breaks things in the environment. And so to show you what one of these looks like, I can create this policy just like a patch, or I can run on demand, kind of like an immediate command line execution if you'd like. Same thing with the device, but you can kind of see what these parts of our code are doing. First is an evaluation code if you need to check for anything, or in this case, just the remediation code, which actually runs that JD&I lookup and makes adjustments to the jar itself if you actually are vulnerable. So it also gets rid of a lot of those false positives people are seeing with Log4j when scanners are just looking at a version. And I can automate it, or I can run on demand. And so, we can start to think about how quickly it is for us to remediate 0 days now as they come up, right? Log4j still being one of the biggest risks 2 years after it came out, it speaks to the difficulty, right, people are having. Flash, like I said, being another one where I just want to make sure that this thing is uninstalled and kept out of my environment, right? So I'm going to create a policy. I'm going to assign this to everybody. I don't want Flash in my organization anymore, right? I can see what that code is doing, but now all I have to do is say, hey, every day or every week or whatever you want, make sure you're running this, right? And create that policy, and it'll unenforce. Okay, we have the policy. It'll unenforce and uninstall Flash, right? So all these use cases at your fingertips hopefully start to get you realizing, again, what are the results we can get, the reduce we can risk, or the risk we can reduce, right? The actual time that we're able to save. We've had folks come to us with all different types of projects as well, as far as the configuration is done. And so it's really, really meaningful, right? As far as how quickly we can get up and running, get those results. And that's sort of this last overview I wanted to share, right? As far as Automox goes. And so when you look at what thoughtful automation really yields for companies, we've kind of talked about these, but to summarize, that immediacy is critical, right? That's what automation gets us as well. That 0 to 100 to doing things in the environment, to configuring, to automating in minutes, is a big part of what a tool should be able to provide for you, and hopefully what you've seen even in a quick demo. But that risk reduction we keep talking about, right? 80% less time to reduce risk instantly, but keep it that way. I don't want to just put in that work and see that ebb and flow. What automation is doing is enforcing that baseline for you continuously. So like that, image we saw, that 93% reduced, that massive cliff, keep it there. And an important thing for everybody in the call is just your time, your energy, your peace, right? Less administration and much lower costs going into that administration as well, that can hopefully be used in a lot more meaningful ways than the mundane having to be manually executed. So that being said, again, I still think the best way to really see proof is in the pudding. We highly encourage that you see this for yourself, test it for yourself, right? Contact our team if you have any questions on implementing safe automation, right? Whether it's to patch, to configure, manage anything we've talked about today, and see those results. Like I said, help us quantify that for you, especially if you think it'll be meaningful for your organization today. But that's what I had. Leaves us with a few minutes if there's any questions, which I know we've had help kind of getting answered so far in the chat, which looks like should be good. But we'll go ahead and see if there's any open questions that are interesting to folks. Okay, I do see one that hasn't been answered yet. What are the most common challenges you see teams facing when implementing automation, and how do you guys address this? That's a good question. I'd say biggest challenge in implementing automation, again, is just getting that buy-in necessarily from the people in the team. And that's why I harp so much on the results, and why we, preface this conversation with safe automation, because we understand the objections that come through it. So how Automox specifically addresses that, anytime we're working with a customer, we gear all results and all testing or all implementation to those results, right? How we can help you achieve SLAs, reduce your risk, all things that are very quantifiable to you and your team to help push those projects. And then when it comes to the implementation itself, like I said, I think the biggest thing is just working with teams and people and vendors that help you reach those goals and explain what that process looks like, because it is newer for most organizations, right? And so I think that's one of the biggest challenges, it being newer, to have tasks we've executed manually for decades, getting that buy-in, but also doing it in a way that actually yields results, and we're not trying to just boil the ocean or make it really overwhelming, is super important. Also, what are some specific features that automate mundane manual tasks, and how easy are these to implement? Yeah, so I think we covered this a little bit, but I would say the most important ones to check off are the patching being the most mundane and manual of tasks, right? Being something that Automox by default, you saw those patch policies, how we can implement, how we can execute on them. You kind of saw how easy it was to implement, right? I didn't hide anything in that process. That's exactly what it looks like for you and your companies to create a patch policy or add configuration automation to your environment, which is exciting. And then it looks like we still have a few as well open here, right? Which I'm more than happy to answer. So how can companies ensure that their automated processes comply with regulatory and industry security standards, especially in heavily regulated sectors like healthcare and finance? Yeah. So that's where part of our onboarding, which again sounds probably strange, because I know with a lot of these companies, support, onboarding, all that is fairly non-existent, but That is super important to us. We have things called optimization sessions, essentially. And so in product, right, there are reports that can help you understand, or worklets that are tagged to help you understand, hey, these worklets are specific to CIS hardening, or, we have folks across the seas who need Cyber Essentials Plus or Essentials 8, right? Different regulatory standards. And, adding those as part of your compliance. Whatever is your compliance in Automox is what we report against, right? So that reporting is almost custom built for you. But because it differs for so many different companies, again, we stress those optimization sessions to understand what are you held by, right, or held to in that regulatory or regulated sector, and then how do we get there, right? And the nice thing is everybody has the same problem. So we have a ton of customers in healthcare, finance, manufacturing, startups, SaaS companies, Gov, SLED. So we've done it across the board, and those sessions are fairly built out at this point. All right. Is there an option to have scheduled automations on the weekends and for certain things, but other aspects, can we require human interaction during the work week? Yes, 100%, right? So it kind of quickly showed that scheduler, that automation. So you can say, hey, there are certain policies, like maybe the workstation policies, they can run during the weekends, or they can run even during the week and kind of let them go. But for servers, it's things into a more manual policy, which is basically on these devices, I want you to show me everything that needs to be updated, but I want to be the one that clicks go, right? I want to be the one that clicks deploy. I really don't want that automated at all. And same thing with what you saw to the user notifications and reboots. We can kind of set those deferrals to line up with either weekend or weekday or whatever works best for your organization. Okay. I know we've got a few more coming in, so I want to try to get to as many as we can, but how quick is patches for 0 days available to deploy in Automox? So really depends, right? 0 day itself, when there isn't a patch available, you've seen we have those worklets or the scripts to be able to remediate that, whether it's a registry key or it was like the log4j example. There's a lot of other Microsofts where we've created the fix in minutes after Microsoft releasing that 0 day. So it really just depends on the severity and the impact to our customers, right? Are we seeing a lot of customers that are concerned about this 0 day? That engineering team creates those scripts so that within minutes you can run that across your entire environment. But as far as the patches themselves, right, since we're that cloud native solution, the OS patches and the third-party patches are available within a minute or two of the actual patch itself being released from the vendor. We just run those security scans, if you remember me talking about it. Thank you so much. Yeah. And then another question, can Automox provide real-time visibility into device compliance and security status? Yeah, so anything that you are using in Automox as your compliance, right? So again, for me, compliant means I want criticals patched in 24 hours. I want third-party patched in 7 days, everywhere else in 30 days, right? For me, compliance means running XYZ worklet, and just making sure configures are in the environment. So that for me is, the actual compliance, and that's what we're going to report against in your environment. So you kind of decide what that means for your organization, but we do report against that. We give real-time visibility into patches that are missing, right? You can run those worklets and results in real time as well. And then lastly, how is AI being used in Automox? Yeah, so there's a few different things, right? There's the backend components and the security components to be able to check for, scale issues, to be able to check and security scan patches and things that are happening in our environment. But the more front-end usage of AI being used in Automox definitely has to do with those configuration changes, right? So when I need to be able to create a body of work that isn't just a simple patch being deployed, then that is where we use that AI or really that ChatGPT plugin to be able to say, how do I take plain text or this scenario and create an automated fix? But like AI or any type of automation, right, always recommend we test that before we deploy anything widely into the environment. And then one more question. As far as the meeting goes, we do only have about another 3 minutes. So no worries if you can't go longer than that. You've absolutely stayed for the bulk of the presentation, which I really appreciate. And the last question that came in, just because I want to make sure we get to it, it's another 0-day, which is super important to talk about. But how does Automox help protect against 0-day vulnerabilities? That's one of the biggest differentiators between us and other tools, right? Is that focus on the non-patchable as well, right? So when a patch isn't available, but I have to do something to my endpoint to make sure it's not vulnerable, right? Whether it's switching a flag or a registry key, or it's a security setting, or it's something like Log4j specifically making edits to a piece of software. Those worklets that we showed you are something that our team is continuously producing to help protect against 0-day, right? And so that, if you've talked to me before, you've looked at Automox, I'll tell you that's the biggest difference at all, is we're not just focusing on the patches and how we can automate, but focusing on, okay, when we know a company needs to do something on the endpoint that's not a patch, right? Even if it's not a 0-day, but it's just, something that makes my environment less risky, less open or susceptible to risk, that's the worklets, right? At its core, those help you protect. They're just PowerShell and Bash. But it's the creation of that, right? It's the maintenance and the creation of that continuously, whether we work with our security vendors, like Log4j Fix was created with another security vendor. But when you go into the worklets, you search CVE, knowing that you have list upon list of fixes for 0-days. So that way I can say, click of a button, okay, I know that I'm protected against Log4j. If we ever have software with Log4j in the environment, we are making those adjustments so we're not vulnerable, right? If we ever have certain registry keys that are changed, we're always switching them back to something that is safe. If I have new devices that are added, and I see those new devices have SMB v1 enabled, I'm disabling that, right? All the settings and configurations that can make you susceptible, knowing that we are enforcing that automation so that you're not, but also creating that automation so that you stay healthy and protected is paramount, right? That is the biggest Automox difference for sure. Okay, well, I think that being said, we've reached about the top of our allotted time. Really appreciate it. I know we took about the full hour, but I loved the questions, the interaction. I really hope this was beneficial as well, and you all have some good takeaways to be able to implement in your day-to-day, and it wasn't just fluff here and there. But as I mentioned, reach out, right? We were asked if this was recorded. It was recorded. We can definitely supply recording or collateral or any information. So really appreciate it. Thank you all so much, and hopefully we chat soon.